Hello, and welcome back to Learning with Lee. In today's episode, we're going to continue our earlier discussion of inheritance by introducing a practical example and doing a bit of implementation on it. We're not going to do a full all-out implementation on it, but we're going to do a more general one. And for this, there's going to be a few general tiers we're going to do here. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is, and in general, one of the things that you're pretty much always going to want to do before you actually begin writing out classes or class hierarchies and developing these different relations between classes, is that you'll want to spend some time drawing it out and thinking about your problem. And we'll get into proper ways of actually doing design in the future once we have a bit better understanding of a lot of general software principles. However, basically what we're going to take a look at right now is what happens to be known as mobs or mobiles, or in general creatures that exist in something like Minecraft. And these can range from anything from a cow, so let's just have a cow as one option. We can have a zombie, so I'll just put zom for now. Or we can have things like villagers even. So those are all different options, and these can all come off of what for now I'll just refer to as mobs. And those happen to be all different things that we could view as their own individual thing that comes off of here. Because they're going to have things such as they're going to have custom loot, they're going to have custom drops in case you kill them, they're going to have different HPs, different abilities to absorb damage, things like zombies can wear armor, whereas villagers and cows can't. Then, frankly, off of villagers, there's going to be multiple subcategories of villagers, because you're going to have things like a blacksmith, so we can just go with... And over here, for zombies, you can also have things such as mini-zombies, or baby zombies. So I'll just go with BZs. And those are all different varieties of things down here, and then also like over here you have librarians. And these are things that determine sort of what houses they live in for villagers, what trades they have, what their appearance is. And while you could technically have that all within villager itself, and just basically, I'm not going to get into what enumerations are yet, because that's something we haven't encountered, and I haven't covered them in any videos yet because of the fact that really they aren't something we need to cover until we encounter something that actually needs to use them. But you could do it using a variety of different enumerations as well as also arrays that then you can index into in order to access specific things based upon the type. Alternatively, you could do it based upon having different children classes that end up working off of that. And theoretically, you could even do that in mobs. However, at the same time, if you do that in mobs, you wind up with a massive amount of bloat all within here, because then you need to store all the zombie-specific information, all the cow-specific information, all of that within mobs. You need to store all the different drops, all the different models. Even if the models are in external files, you need to store references to what all those different files are in terms of how they're colored and how they appear. So it's a matter of, realistically, this isn't necessarily just having a single class the best way to deal with that. So it's a good idea to really have these multiple classes. So let's hop over into here. Let's just, within here, create a new folder. Let's call it Minecraft for now, since that's what we're basing this off of. Then within here, let's create ourselves a header file, and this is just going to be our mobs.h. So, what are we looking to do within mobs.h? Well, first off, we're going to need a class. And this is going to be our class mobs. Well, I want to add a namespace for this. So, let's give it a... And actually, because it actually makes some sense to, I'm going to quickly save this. I'm going to create a new folder for this. Within here, just so as I can group together all of our mobs into a single folder. Move this guy into here. So we're going to do namespace Minecraft, and then closing brace there. And then within namespace Minecraft, we're going to do namespace mobs. Just because all of these I want to have in the same namespace for it. So given that is our considerations, and now we have this class here, there's going to be a few things that we're going to look to have within this. Let's start off with a Boolean for is hostile. As well as also within here, we're going to want things such as public. We're going to want private. And lastly, we're going to want one additional keyword that I have not yet shown you guys, and that is protected. And what protected says is that I want these variables that are within the protected block to be private except for the fact they are usable by any children or any descendant classes. So I think that's protected in mobs, can be used by cow, zombie, the blacksmith, etc., because of the fact that they will all have access to it. Whereas things that are private can only be used by mobs itself. Or more accurately, directly accessed by mobs itself. There's always ways of indirectly accessing things through functions or methods that are either friends or end up making modifications to it. However, for things such as is hostile, while in most mobs cases, that's either going to be defined upon creation of that mob. So we might say that, well, we could just have that be part of the constructor of the class, is that takes in an argument, such as in, I want mobs and I want to take in a bool is hostile, or is H for now. And we can just go with that so that's a field. And we could just go with that to say whether or not it's hostile. And then in there we just assign it to is hostile. However, that isn't necessarily something that we want to do because of things such as zombie pigmen, in which by default they aren't hostile, but in case you hit one of them, they turn hostile. So we need the ability to toggle this. As well as then eventually they might end up respawning or the ones that are hostile despawn and new ones end up respawning. So that's something that we would have to consider. Similarly, in terms of things such as in case something happens to need to despawn at a certain time, there's a few different ways in which we could do that. And one of the easiest ones is that we can track how long it's been around for, and in a certain period of time we either clean it up or we could spawn it in with basically a certain amount of time until it automatically despawns. And certain things such as cows or sheep wouldn't automatically despawn. This would remain in there until killed. What we could have then is we could just use something such as an int and call it time to, or time till, or if we really want to, time until despawn. So as that we can basically go, when we initially create this mob, we give it a certain amount of time left. And basically, every time we end up going through our general tick of checking whether or not things should despawn, we can see whether or not its time to despawn has decreased, as well as then decrement it further. There's a few other things we'd want to check to see, such as in case they're in combat with a player, don't just despawn them. Or if they happen to be within a certain amount of distance of the player, don't automatically despawn them. But at the same time, that's something we can do, and then in case we wanted to care about it being... Well, the question then would be how to deal with it for things such as cows, sheep, etc. And really, what we could do is we could change this to an unsigned int. Then in here, what we can have then is we can have another, and we can just sort of group these logically so as that we have our bools up in one location. We happen to have our ints and the like down below it, or in their own little thing, so we can sort of logically group these. And we can have in here something along the lines of does despawn. And one of the things that we're going to want up here, probably for our this, is some unsigned int to tell it how long it should be until it despawns, or because of the fact that we end up having to assign this when we initially create something, because otherwise it will complain about any of these variables not being initialized in our constructor of mobs, that's going to be something worth just taking care of and being forced to do in our constructor. So it doesn't really matter for that. Then what we're going to want to do beyond here, and really we could be looking at creating some different methods for it. So we would want some form of pathing method that would end up being used in order to find it's basically in case like it's a skeleton or a zombie, so as it can track to the player. Alternatively, in case say it's a villager, it needs to be able to run away from things such as zombies. It needs to be able to close doors, open doors, go into rooms, and move about sort of randomly. And then for cows and for sheep and the like, occasionally they'll jump, occasionally they'll move to the left, occasionally to the right. and occasionally they won't move at all. So each of them needs to have their own algorithm for doing specific things. So what we can have in here is some protected, and we'll just call this one a void move. And basically what I would be looking at doing then, or more accurately, let's call it something along the lines of perform move. So what we can have public then is we can have a void move, and all it'll do is it'll just call perform move. And then it will end up calling down into here, so as that basically whenever we end up doing something such as our check where we decrement this, and basically this would be something that happens a certain number of times a second, where it's going to update its move, it's going to end up effectively shifting a block or deciding how it's in the middle of moving, which also would be another thing worth sort of in general tracking, basically such as up here, and actually alphabetize this some, and then go with something such as a bool is moving. So as that basically, once we start a move, we can just leave it moving until it completes that move. So what we would actually have to take a look at then, and really what we could even do is we could end up generating a custom class for moving that ends up tracking basically, okay, which direction is it moving, how far is it moving, etc. Alternatively, we could actually just leave it so as that every single time, even though it might be an infinitesimal amount of movement that it does, we just wait for this method to actually move it at all. And we keep doing this and creating more of these methods and fields until we end up actually having a fully well fleshed out mobs. But for now, let's focus on what we're doing this for, and that's to look at inheritance. So within here, let's create ourselves another header file. And for this one here, we can just call this one villager.h. And then within here, we're going to want the same sort of, let's just split this so it's over here. Same namespaces as before. Good. Manage style will complete that for me. Then here, we're just going to want now to have a class, and we can call this villager. The way in which you signify that it is derived from another class is by using this colon after your class villager here, followed by something such as public to signify basically the access you want the parent class to be accessible by people accessing a villager. So if I have some villager v, do I want them to be able to access the public methods in move? So I could theoretically call it protected, allowing only children of villager to access mobs. And then, of course, you follow it up with the name of your parent. So in this case here, it would be only the children get access to mobs. If I make it public, then it's not going... Here's the important thing to note about this. This public here is not going to all of a sudden convert these into public methods. What restricts, though, is these public methods. It ends up using whatever is the more constrained access of the two. It's not a way of all of a sudden making things that were protected or private all of a sudden available to anyone. It just basically says that use whichever one of these is more limiting or strict, so as that you can end up controlling the access to mobs from villager by that means. And that happens to be something that we might get into in the future, the different ways in which you want to do it. In general, though, you're just going to use this colon, followed by public, followed by the name of the class you want to be your parent. And we'll get into the rest of this on the next episode. What I'd recommend doing is a bit of a assignment for this one is spend some time going through, think about at least creating the different zom, cow, or the like, and having those be derived off of mobs. And we'll get into how you do constructors, how you actually access these different parts of it, and some of the more nuanced portions of inheritance in the future episodes. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.